Hey everybody, welcome to LakerCentral. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day to everyone out there. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the pre and post game content. Also, subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, TuneIn, wherever you prefer to listen to your podcast. And you can also check out the podcast on crossoverpodcast.com. I'm Alex. That's Vinay. We're here to talk about Warriors and Lakers tonight at Staples Center. Unfortunately, we're not there. Fans aren't there, but that's just how things are going right now. Vinay, how
Yep.
are you doing on this fine MLK Day?
I am doing good. I watched some of the games earlier in the day. I ended up watching, um, I watched the Atlanta game,
Mm-hmm.
which was very interesting in the sense that it was also very frustrating to watch that game because I don't know what their coach is doing when it comes to some of the stuff that he does. But that's for neither here nor there. And then I watched that Phoenix Memphis game. That was actually really good. It was a lot of back and forth basketball. And now, as we're live streaming, instead of me having to listen to the live broadcast, we're chit chatting about the Lakers game that's coming up as I sort of watch this Nets Bucks game with a side eye, just looking to see, what's going on with that matchup.
Well, before we get into the news of the game of the night, um, I want to get your opinion on this because I've already talked to let fans know about this, but I was curious to see what you thought. We got some breaking Kobe Bryant statue news, guys. Of course, it's not him getting a statue at Staples Center. So, the great Kobe Bryant will get a statue at the National Garden of American Heroes, but that will be on the East Coast in D.C. Whenever that
Yeah.
garden will be built, and it's not just Kobe that will have a statue there. Guys, it's going to be like a lot of people from history. I mean, Miles Davis is going to have a statue there. George Fox, Henry Ford, George Washington Carver. The list goes on. A lot of folks from various walks of life from history. But White House made this announcement for Nate, so it just in general, I imagine you're happy Kobe's getting a statue somewhere. But just what are your overall thoughts of him getting a statue and it being on MLK Day of all days?
Yeah, I'm glad he's getting recognized as an American hero by our government.
Yeah.
But I think that's just about it. I'll say this. Earlier, or I would say last year, and then also this year. Well, not this year so much, but last year there's a big thing about like those Confederate statues being torn down and stuff, and people in like local areas tearing down those Confederate statues and what they mean. So I think it does mean something when somebody builds a statue for folks that are important to other folks' culture that have had influence on American society. Because you and I have talked offline very much, and I've always posed you the same question over and over again. It's not something for us to get in depth in regards to here, maybe on one of your other podcasts, but what is American culture, right? And one of the things I've always told you is I don't think America has culture. I think America just takes parts of whatever it likes, and that's what they call American culture. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just the whole thought process of a melting pot and stuff like that. The stuff that we learned in history class way back in the day is apropos of what is America is today. So I think it's a nice gesture. Obviously, the political climate that we're in right now, and the political climate and cultural climate that we've been in for the past few years with the current administration, and just kind of whatever else moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
has been very complicated. I can't speak on behalf of Black folks everywhere, but I'm sure that they have mixed feelings about seeing something like this. But as a Laker fan, I am honored that somebody who is very near to our hearts, Kobe Bryant, even outside of what happened with his tragedy and stuff like that, is getting a statue. Because it's very clear that even outside of just Laker fans in LA, Kobe Bryant meant a lot to a lot of people in this
Mm-hmm.
country, even though he was just an athlete for one specific team. And he also means a lot globally because we saw the
Yeah.
global response to his death and stuff like that. And, I would say that the day he passed away was definitely a day where I feel like time kind of just stood still for everybody. And it was
Mm-hmm.
like that for like a week. And that date is coming up very soon, the anniversary of his, and it's crazy because we've been doing this podcast, and it's already we're almost to 1 year to the date, and I don't know how I'll process my feelings in regards to it, but it's a nice gesture. But I'll take it as that. As a Laker fan, I'll take it as it's a nice gesture, and that's all I'll take it as. Not anything much more deeper in terms of what is rooted in.
Yeah. I mean, everybody probably knows by now. I live not too far from DC, and so I've been to DC more times than I can remember. It's a place that I frequently hang out at least when I was out partying a bit more when I was a little younger. Um, but I have been down there to see Dr. King's statue, and I've been to the African American History Museum, and I go down there a lot before COVID happened, and so for me, an East Coast Lakers fan, for Kobe to have a statue there, I think is really cool because when he gets one at Staples Center, I won't be able to just walk down Figueroa Street and go see Kobe's statue. Yeah, that won't. It's not
Hmm.
like that for me on the East Coast, but one being so close to my home, it'll be nice that when I go down there to visit Dr. King's memorial and other things, I can at least stop and make a point to go see Kobe's statue. In regards to the political stuff that's going on and why this was done and all that stuff, I mean, I tweeted it out. Kobe made it pretty clear, I think, in his own words, how he felt about Trump and all that stuff. So you guys are welcome to go search that if you will. But it's cool that he's gonna have a statue there. There's no timetable on it, so we have no idea how long it's
Mhm.
gonna take and all those things. But it's a lot of because it's so many other people getting statues as well. We don't know if he's going to be in the first, trench of statues. If he'll be, we
Right.
have no idea. It just was announced today, and it's just what it is. So, um, it's nice that Kobe will get a statue. And then this other news, man. Before we get into the actual part of the game, let me bring this part up as well. Let's see. Can you see that? Lakers.
Yes, I do see it. Yeah.
Yep, Lakers team evaluations, man. And so, all the Lakers are one of the most profitable teams in the NBA. I mean, we know that. But how do you feel about Golden State passing the Lakers up, and at least according to Forbes and all this, that Golden State is now worth more than the Lakers?
Yeah, I mean it's I don't really. It's not like it's not my money, right? So it's not like a thing of pride for me to be like,
Yeah.
oh snap, like you're this is valued more than that is. I would expect the Warriors to be up there. A, the success of the franchise. B, also they like I don't know if anybody's seen like Chase Center and stuff like that, the new stuff.
Yeah.
They have got a shitload of advertising all over that
Mm-hmm.
damn place. Like I don't know if you guys watch like if you've seen any of the national broadcasts. Like every team has like kind of a different setup and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like Chase Center has got like their ads set up. So whatever their ad impressions they've been selling or whatever advertising they've been selling for their new place, they're definitely setting it up because I feel like they're I mean they've got it props to them. It's a good business prop that even without fans they're still able to get all of their advertising out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really not a surprise to me. The Lakers, I mean, I don't think you watch on Spectrum, but if you watch on the Spectrum feed that the Lakers are on, there's like 4 commercials. It's the same exact 4 commercials every single time. It's a freaking Carl's Jr. commercial, a Morongo commercial, which is a local casino that's out here,
Mm-hmm.
and then like 2 other ones. And I'll tell you what, I would pay money for a version of Spectrum that doesn't have those ads because it is brutal to watch those same 4 ads over and over again. But these valuations will always be like based on like who owns the arena. Like
Right.
we know the reason why the Knicks are so valuable is because of the person that
Madison
owns
Square
it,
Garden.
and
Right.
MSG owns the Knicks, and like that's how that sort of stuff kind of works out. So I really don't feel any type of way. Like this is all new money. Actually, what surprises me is the Clippers aren't higher. I'm actually surprised that the Clippers aren't higher, but I won't be surprised that once Bombers new arena that they'll skyrocket into like the top 5 or something like that too. Just because it's the math behind these kind of rankings is always a little wonky and stuff like that. So that's the way I always see it. But yeah, I don't think anything much of it. It's really not anybody's money, like other than the billionaires. So what I'm more interested in is where are we when it comes to the actual basketball stuff? How many championships do we got? How many times are we competing? There you go. Lisa mentioned it. Jack in the Box is the other one. There's a Carl Jr. commercial There's a Jack in the Box commercial. There's a freaking Morongo commercial. Oh, and then there's they have this local ad that you know how they used to have like this ad seen on TV products. Like they used to have different stuff like the slap chop and all these
Mm-hmm.
different things and whatever. So Spectrum's got like this freaking tactical flashlight commercial that they keep running, and I'm like, who's the audience they're selling this to? Because they've got like a bunch of old people walking in the dark and stuff like that in some of those commercials. And I'll just be like, what is going on? This doesn't make any sense. Why are you guys selling tactical flashlights to people who live in the Los Angeles area? This does it just like it would make sense if it was like a team that was like
Mm-hmm.
out in the boonies or something like that. But I don't know, man. But those four commercials are the ones that are always the ones constantly that are out there, and I get sick and tired of it. But look, man, we know that the Lakers are a very profitable franchise, and we know that even in times where like there's a recession or there's times when like a pandemic where teams revenues are like going down and people are cutting costs, like Tillman Fertitta basically
Yep.
giving away really quality players for what's it called? What am I thinking of? Like just expiring salaries. The
Mm-hmm.
Lakers don't do stuff like that, and so it'll be even more important next season if we try to retain all the guys that we currently have. So, though the Warriors may be above us in valuation, they're definitely not above us in terms of actual basketball stuff on the on the
No.
on the on the court. So that'll be interesting, right?
Well, and if all 30 teams hit the market today, the Lakers would go for more than everybody else. Like I firmly believe that. And Madison Square Garden is kind of like the Chase Center in that. So, well, it's known as Madison Square Garden, so they've never sold the naming rights. Like the Chase Center, they sold the naming rights, and most arenas do that. But at Madison Square
Yeah.
Garden, Dolan has been pretty smart about he sells sections of the arena, so it's J.P. Morgan Chase, sponsoring certain sections, so he earns a lot of revenue that way. But as I've told fans who were asking me about this, the one thing to look at is the arenas, and the Bus family doesn't own Staples Center, so you look at the Knicks, Golden State, the Nets. Those team owners also own the arenas, and that stuff goes into play with all this. If the Lakers happen to if the Bus family owns Staples Center, now we're probably talking the Lakers being valued at maybe 8 or 9 billion. But what's really interesting is that these the three franchises that are all valued over $1 billion, they're now worth more than any other North American team outside of the Cowboys. Which is that in
Wow.
itself, the basketball teams are now worth that much more than the football teams is crazy. But once Ballmer gets his new stadium or his new arena built, I'm sure the Clippers will skyrocket as well. But it was interesting that news came out. So, but I know you guys are waiting for us to talk about the game. So let me move this out of our way. Give me a second. Let's get back to the business at hand for the game. Um, so the Lakers are taking on the Warriors tonight, man. And the Warriors haven't been very good, although they've been a bit better lately since Draymond got back. They seem to be playing a lot better. We know Steph went off. I think we had 50 or 60 not that long ago.
Yeah, a few
That
games ago he went out for
yeah.
like 60. Yeah.
So, but this is still a game tonight where the Lakers should win. Warriors are traveling to Staples Center. Lakers have been a bit up and down there. I think they're a game above 500 at Staples Center, but if they're focused, there's really no reason. I don't care if Steph has one of those, Steph Curry nights. There really should be no reason
Yeah.
why the Lakers lose, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's the, the Warriors. I mean, because they've been on national TV. I've been watching a lot of national TV games. Like it's not like they're not a good team. They have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of talent. They have a lot of they have a lot of athletes, but putting it all together has been a little bit of a trial for that team. A lot of folks have talked about Kelly Oubre. They talked about Andrew Wiggins. One of the issues that they probably have is their bench unit is not consistent, especially on the defensive end. It's very, very, very shaky in terms of their defense. Now, we know how it works when it comes to the Lakers. Whenever the Lakers play, we know, or whenever somebody plays the Lakers, these teams turn into like
Mm-hmm.
the great, like the all stars are basically, or whatever versions of themselves. So I think we'll probably get a very competitive version of this Golden State Warriors team. I don't know how locked in they'll be on the defensive end, but they're definitely exploitable on the defensive end, if that makes sense. And they do have that young guy, James Wiseman. I like him a lot. Very mobile, big, but
Mm-hmm.
he's very raw in the sense that he hasn't caught up to the sort of speed. that speed of the NBA. And Kerr's offense doesn't necessarily make it very easy for guys like him to pick it up. But I'm sure over time he'll be better. But the story really should be for the Lakers that they should overwhelm them on the interior, and if their defense is locked in like it's supposed to be, this can very well be a blowout game too as well. I know there's a lot of folks on the timeline that are the Braun folks, and then we know the other side of the coin of that is also all the folks that are Steph Curry fans and very devout fans. And every fan base has people like that, and there's Harden fans and Paul George fans and Giannis fans and all that sort of stuff. So that's like the new wave of promoting certain guys. So I think this matchup, even though it's just a regular season matchup, will mean a lot for those two sides of the aisle when it comes to that sort of thing. But the Lakers really should win, and it shouldn't be a game that they're getting overwhelmed at. The only way I could see them getting overwhelmed is if we come out and we can't make a single shot and we're playing no defense. So same formula that's been for all of our other losses, where somebody, that we just take our foot off the gas when it comes to playing defense and stuff like that. So the Lakers should win handily. Not to say that the Warriors are not a good team. They are a good team, but they're not a good team on their defensive side. They do struggle to some degree on the defensive side, and their bench is definitely not good on the defensive end either. A lot of problems. So be interesting to see, just kind of how they go. I'll be curious to see actually how Dennis Schroeder defends Steph and how he has to like navigate chasing him around and stuff like that through the screens, because they still use Steph in that same manner a lot of times. They use him in that first action pick and roll, and then sometimes they have him running off the screens, especially with Draymond back, because he can kind of be the trigger man when it comes to those sort of things. So it'll be a nice test for both KCP and Dennis Schroeder to see how they can defend Steph when they get assigned on him.
Yeah, I mean, Steph's going to have his hands full with those guys on him. And Schroeder, we've seen him defend some of the better point guards this season. He doesn't back down. So I don't suspect that he will back down against Steph. I think Weissman, he's going to have to go up against guys like Anthony Davis. He's going to probably get a healthy dose of Davis at some point throughout the game. And Anthony obviously is in a class all by himself. And so he'll have his hands full. I think Draymond has kind of re-energized them a little bit, but they've still dropped their last couple games. I mean, they're all the talk about how bad they looked early in the season. I don't think they haven't looked that bad, and all the talk about Steph kind of falling off this cliff. I think a lot of that conversation comes from certain fan bases, not even so much Laker fan bases, but just the individual player fan bases that are out there. To your point, but if the Lakers come out,
I was gonna say that's fine. No, I was gonna say that the thing about the player specific fan bases, like we know, like those are always going to exist, because it's very hard to root for a team, especially if a team is consistently poor. Like the Knicks are a perfect example. Like they're playing much better this year, but people are still kind of waiting off on jumping on the Knicks bandwagon, because we really don't know if it's going to be consistent, because this is a James Dolan run team, and so like player standing is always going to happen. I wouldn't even call it standing. I just assume, if you really like a player, it's totally fine. It's just the new generation. It's not, I started watching 20 years ago. I started watching 25 years ago. I watched the Lakers, and that's how I came to that conclusion. You know what I mean? So it's just like, it's all right. I understand. So I expect whoever the winner of this game ends up being, there's going to be a lot of chatter on the timeline. I just enjoy reading it, but I just kind of laugh and stuff like that. But it'll be interesting for sure to see just kind of how this sort of works out.
It's crazy how bad Oubre has been. Like, certainly shooting, but just how bad overall I think he's been. I mean, he was a coveted, free agent, or a coveted guy that people were looking to grab. I mean, Lakers fans, I thought he'd be great for the Lakers. The funny part is, if we ended up getting him, I think that he probably would have been great with us. But he hasn't looked good with Golden State. Andrew Wiggins, who I don't think many people are high on anyway. I mean, being on Golden State means you're on the national stage, and he has not been great for them as well. So I think that Golden State fans are kind of getting a dose of, what it's really like when you're at the bottom, right? Like, there's a generation of Golden State fans that they're accustomed to being good, because they were great for a 5-year run. They were really, really good, and they just look bad some nights. But fortunately, go ahead.
I was gonna say I agree. I think this is like sort of uncharted territory. It's also like it's funny, because it's also kind of similar for like the Laker fans that don't know what a good version of this Lakers team looks like. Mm-hmm. Like they only started watching like when Kobe was out, or like kind of Kobe was at like the tail end of his career or whatever. And then what's it called? like than the rebuilding years. So like now you see the Lakers, maybe they just don't know how to handle the success and stuff like that. So it's just interesting to see both sides of the spectrum and stuff like that when it comes to this team.
I mean, it's certainly flipped, and there are people out there that believe that some Golden State fans were really Lakers fans. While the Lakers were bad, they jumped on the Golden State bandwagon, and now
I
Lakers
mean,
are great again.
I'm sure. You look, I think there is a set fan base. Okay, I don't even think they're Laker fans. I don't think they're Warriors fans. I don't think they're anything like that. I think there are just fans that just like they gravitate from like team to team. So like last year they were rooting for like the Clippers or something like that. This year they're probably rooting for the Nets. You know what I mean? Like there's just people who like go like every time the Lakers had to play a different team, all of a sudden that fan base that we were playing against was like the biggest fan base on Twitter outside of like the Lakers fan base. So it was like Miami for a little bit and then Denver. I was just like, all right, I guess I didn't know that these fan bases had so many guys that were into them, but it's also Twitter's weird, man. Twitter's you don't even know if half the people you're talking to are bots or if they're real people. So it's just
Well,
kind of how it works.
and I've talked about my own brother-in-law who lives in Maryland and has been a Wizards fan, but yet he was a Clippers fan last year and now he's a Nets fan. So I mean, like, I think you have a lot of that going on.
I agree. I think that's going to. I think the NBA, because it's so easy to, or because people feel that it's not like football, right? So because
Yeah.
people feel like it's so easy to have a conversation about basketball, and that basketball analysis is like easy because of like the analytics and stuff that people throw out there. I think it makes the viewing experience kind of casual. So it's just like when we watch these games and stuff like that, people say things about a team that's like completely untrue. You know, like um, they'll go into these situations and say, "Oh man, look at these guys that the Lakers have. Like these guys are all old and washed up and stuff like that." And then all of a sudden they'll play the Lakers and be like, "Oh, wait a second, like whatever I must have been reading or whatever analytics people are throwing at me is clearly not matching up with the team that I'm watching." And so that's why I think a lot of this Lakers team caught so many people by surprise and stuff like that. So it's just the nature of NBA fandom. They try to make it as bite sized as possible, and I feel like it kind of hurts the game in that regards, and it makes it hard for fans to be real fans and stuff like that of the team because you don't learn the nitty gritty stuff unless you follow people who write about the team and stuff like that on a regular basis.
We're at a point where, I mean, people don't sit down and watch 2.5 hours of basketball, 3 hours of basketball anymore. And so with the, like Bleacher Report blowing up and places like House of Highlights and all these like these Instagram channels that just post the highlights. I mean, Sports Center probably was the birth of that, Sports Center Top 10. And out of that now, because of social media, anyone can kind of create that kind of channel. And so now everything is just like boom, boom, boom. And you're right. No one's actually, I mean, we watch entire games and things like that, but I remember like rushing to get home just so I could watch the entirety of a Laker game. Now, I wouldn't even go out some nights. Like, or I'd be out, but I'd be watching it on my phone. I don't know if people do that anymore. Probably not. And then we've got, when LeBron became a Laker fan, then it's like, his fan base jumped on the Lakers, right? So it went from Cleveland to Miami, back to Cleveland, and now LeBron. And
Sure.
Shout out to Marty in the chat. I mean, he admitted it. He's a LeBron fan and became a Lakers fan when LeBron came here. So like there's this influx of new fans, man, and it's an interesting time. But the NBA, I think, is just laughing all the way to the bank, as shown by those valuations by these teams and the TV deal and all that stuff. I mean, Adam Silver's probably happy about all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting experience, at least on social media, to have a fan base of a specific player join your fan base. And I haven't even been on Twitter that long. I've barely been on Twitter for like 2 years. So it's not like I could say I was back in 2010 when Twitter's inception happened and stuff like that. And I was paying attention to all this sort of stuff. But I think one of the things that's interesting is that like the volume, like one of the things we've always said is like NBA Twitter is not as big as is really not because I see a lot of the same faces show up repeatedly for different topics and stuff like that. But Lakers Twitter makes up a big section of NBA Twitter. And a lot of the engagement that places like Bleacher Report and House of Highlights, they try to not antagonize so much, but they try to get the engagement from Laker fans. And so when other fans see all this Lakers content, like last year, people are like, why is Alex Caruso getting so much coverage from Bleacher Report? People don't seem to understand. Laker fans respond to it, but when you guys respond to it complaining about it, like
Yep.
you're just amplifying the voice of Lakers Twitter. You know what I mean? And so like it's one of the things I think that like people have to like kind of understand is LeBron is the biggest athlete, one of the biggest athletes. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not including soccer because I know soccer is much more of a global sport, but he is one of the biggest, not if not the biggest non-soccer athlete in the world. Um, and the Lakers, regardless of what their valuation is, are one of the biggest brands globally in the world.
Yep.
There are people all over the world that wear Lakers gear, and it's not because of LeBron. Some of them do wear it because of LeBron, but it's also because of guys like Kobe Bryant, Magic Johnson, the
Yeah.
legacy guys that have been part of this franchise. And you're marrying those two fan bases together. And obviously, there's extremes of different ones. There are LeBron fans who keep it real. They say, "Hey, played a good game, didn't play a good game." Then you get the folks that are very extreme, and he can't do anything wrong, and that part I understand too as well. But that's just what happens, man. LeBron is a super athlete, a super global athlete, and this is a super global brand. And it's a marriage. Um, it's a perfect marriage for what they are. And all that Laker fans really ask is that he continues the championship standard, and he's obviously already done that.
Yep.
So it's only wherever we can go from here. Just got to keep going up.
So I find this funny. Marty said it's way easier being part of Lakers Nation than a Cavs fan. And yes, just being a Lakers fan, I told this to Kristen from CBS. Like, Lakers fans are spoiled, man. Like, we are a spoiled group, and I think sometimes that shows.
Yeah.
And how we critique the team, how we critique players. I mean, but essentially, whether you're a grandparent, a parent, a kid, like, you've lived through a Lakers championship run, and not many other franchises. I don't think any franchise in basketball can say that. Maybe in some other sports, but we're spoiled as fans, and so yeah, I just think that where we're at this point, I think basketball has changed, and I think that the days of being a diehard, fan of a certain team, there's always going to be those people that exist, but I just think that it's easier for people to follow superstars from team to team because these superstars go from team to team, and sometimes I wonder. I'm sure you remember this when Kobe was flirting with the Clippers and when he was flirting with Chicago. Had he jumped ship, how many Lakers fans would have went with him? I mean, we haven't really had a guy leave. I mean, we traded Shaq, but we haven't had a guy leave the Lakers who was in his prime like some of these other franchises have. And so I wonder how that would have changed the Lakers fan base if Kobe ended up leaving when he was upset that you remember the infamous cell phone video of him saying, "Get Jason Kidd."
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was divisive. I mean, even it wasn't as divisive because I was younger when the Kobe Chicago. He's like, all right, trade me to Chicago, and that's when they were talking about trading him for like Luol Deng and Ben Gordon and stuff like that when he asked for a trade because if you weren't serious. I remember during that time there was a lot of people that were there were a lot of players that were very like not players, sorry, people fans that were like very very specific like. They were actually with Kobe in regards to like him being traded, and I wonder if some of that also had to do with the fact that like Shaq was gone and stuff like that, and people thought that because there's a divide, fans that love Shaq and fans that love Kobe, but over time when Kobe won more championships, people realized, oh, this guy's like one of the greatest players of all time. We're not talking about like a great shooting guard or a great player for the Lakers. We're talking about somebody who's in the upper echelons of all-time NBA players, and I think that appreciation probably wouldn't have come had he left the team and stuff like that. But you're right. Like, who knows? Like, it's hard to calculate how much of the fan base was Kobe Bryant specific, and how much of the fan base was Lakers specific. But I would say that social media has made it much more easier to be a player specific fan, and just the growth of the internet, and much easier to be a player specific fan versus a fan of the team and stuff like that. Sure. Because there's just so many voices when it comes to the team, it's hard to follow sometimes. So I get it. And look, as fans, you'd rather be a fan of somebody who's continually finding success. You don't want to be a fan of a team that's just and we've talked about this, where the owners prioritize business revenue instead of prioritizing what's it called? Instead of prioritizing like winning and stuff like that. Yep. So I get it. Who wants to root for a team that doesn't like that doesn't prioritize the same things that you do. So it makes sense to me. That's why we always tell fans to just be fans of the Lakers, but for some reason they don't want to do that, even though we just keep winning. So who knows?
They want to hate the Lakers, and it is what it is. And so let me ask you this, man, about Golden State. So I was on Ricky's podcast, Late Night Lake Show, earlier, and him and Laquami were talking about this, and I think this is an interesting question. He asked me, did I think if would Golden State ever be a true contender again, at least in Steph Curry's time? And my answer was no. I consider contenders as the top 14, the best four teams in the NBA. And if I'm looking at the NBA right now, LeBron James has certainly taken a step back, but he's still better than 99% of the players in the NBA. He might still be the best player in the NBA. Anthony Davis is still in his prime. If the Nets are the Nets, they've got 3 stars. They should be very good the next few years. And then you've got Milwaukee. They extended Giannis. They got Drew. Who knows what, they got Middleton. But so and then you have the Clippers. So you've got those 4 teams. How does Golden State become Golden State again, even if Clay comes back? And I believe that if the Warriors were really about being contenders again, they would have looked to, or they will look to, trade Weissman or whoever they need to once Clay gets back to maximize whatever prime year Stephen Clay and Draymond have left. But do you think that they will ever return to being a legit Western Conference threat?
So I think it really depends on Clay and what he looks like. Now, we've seen with Durant, a guy who is a high quality shooter who probably doesn't rely so much on his legs when it comes, just because he's so tall, getting his jump shot off, that it hasn't affected him too much. So if and obviously modern medicine also makes players much more successful. So I think if Clay can come back to 90% or maybe even 100% of whatever he was before, I think they can definitely be contenders. But I think I'll tell you this. I think the surprise factor of their offense is gone.
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing that we've always talked about is how sometimes everybody is like a year behind. So last season, teams were not prepared for the amount of size that the Lakers were going to attack you with. So they were being overwhelmed because everybody had been trending towards take more threes, play smaller, play faster, take more threes. And the Lakers just said, okay, we're not doing that. We're going to do this instead because this is what works for us. And we won a championship. And now you're seeing teams have to stock up. Like you have to have one true big because you're going to have to deal with somebody that's a team like the Lakers that's going to bring somebody. But then so in that example with the Warriors, I think their offense can be good. I think Clay and Steph, they can still be world-class shooters. I think Draymond's one of the smartest passers of the ball and readers of defensive schemes that there is in the league. And he's a very high IQ guy. We can see that also when he's talking about the game in post games and stuff like that on TNT. A lot of people always say, oh man, this guy's really smart. He still is very smart. But I think the issue for them is when teams finally figure it out and they know, okay, we know what your offense is now. We know what you guys are trying to do in the kind of offense. Is it distinctly different from everybody else's offense, like the other 29 teams? Yeah, there's probably only one team in the league, and it's the Warriors, that runs 2 guys like shooting guards, basically, and tells them to run around screens, and they screen for each other and stuff like that. They're unique in that sense. And so in the regular season, I think that's very hard to deal with. But I think like when the playoffs and stuff come around, that's when it starts getting a little bit shaky. So could they be contenders? For sure. For a team that's not prepared or doesn't have the personnel to deal with their style of offense, they won't be. But I think teams have started to catch up to that. And so you keep hearing people say, oh, well, they're boxing wanting Steph. They're boxing wanting Steph. And so they're like, oh, nobody else gets boxing one. The reason why they're boxing wanting Steph is because Steph uniquely requires that kind of defense. Does that make sense? So if I'm running a type of defense that only my team runs, you're going to see a defense that teams are only going to deploy on your team. And so that's the part that I think folks, and it is a compliment to Steph that people have to run a very unique style defense against him. But at the same time, you guys are the only ones that run this kind of offense.
Right.
You won't find very many offenses that have that basically run two shooting guards that screen for each other that are like very read and react when it comes to their cutting and stuff like that off of screens and stuff like that. And they can be contenders. I just don't know if people will be surprised by their offense anymore. And I think teams will try and find a way to get the ball out of Steph's hands and out of Clay's hands and make Draymond have to be the scorer, make Wiseman or Wiggins. And we know for a fact that both Steph and Clay are probably the most efficient scorers in terms of like how much effort it takes and or like just how much rhythm they really need to score and stuff like that. So it's very hard to match up guys like that, and it is very unique, but it always depends on circumstance. So I if Clay was healthy this year, I really had them as like a top 4 seed. I thought that they would definitely be a top 4 seed. And I think because Clay is out, they're having to rely on guys like Kelly Oubre. They're having to rely on guys a little bit more like Andrew Wiggins. And that's a problem for them because Clay was so efficient and he's so like disciplined and trustworthy when it comes to the stuff that he does. Like he doesn't just like go, he doesn't go, what's it called? Like he doesn't go wild card and just start, doing stuff out of character. They could, they could rely on him to always do consistent stuff. And I think because they don't have that, they're having to do a little bit more wild card stuff with some of their guys. So could they return to contendership? For sure. I think a lot of that will have to do with what Clay looks like and really what their defense looks like. Because that Clay, I've said it before. That's a guy that needed to. I don't know how he hasn't made it to some all defensive teams because he's had to defend a gauntlet of guys in the Western Conference on the way to whatever championships they've won. Even the ones without KD, like he was having to defend Lillard, McCollum, Westbrook. Like there is a Chris Paul, tons of guys. So it's just he's very underrated. I don't think Warrior fans underrate him, but I think people outside of the Warriors fan base probably underrate how good he really is.
So let's switch to the Lakers for a second. Lakers and the Cavs. So I'm sure you heard about the stuff with Kevin Porter Jr. The Cavaliers are looking to either trade him or release him. I don't think the Lakers should trade for him because I think anything that Cleveland would want, the Lakers probably wouldn't want to give up. But if he gets released, then I think he's more than worth taking a flyer on and seeing what the situation is with him. But how do you feel about him? Do you think that if he gets released, or if they call the Lakers and say, hey, we want THT, should the Lakers even get involved in a conversation for Kevin Porter?
So if he's available, I would like the Lakers to look at him. But I would not trade anybody for him. And the reason I wouldn't trade anybody for him is because I like all the guys that we have. So unless we're trading like, I don't know, Quinn Cook or something like somebody inconsequential, I really don't see the need to do that. I liked Kevin Porter when he was actually coming out. And he was in the draft and stuff like that. I don't know how he dropped so far down, but I'm guessing maybe it was behavioral issues or there must have been some intel that some of these teams did. And that's why he dropped down. The Cavs, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they traded like 4 second rounders to move into the bottom of the first round to be able to draft him. And it was the same draft, I think, that the Lakers got Taylor Horton Tucker in. Kevin Porter Jr. is also a Clutch client. So he was doing like the Clutch Pro Day 2 years ago and stuff like that. I like him a lot. He's a lefty. He's from USC, so he's from a local school that's out here. He reminds me a lot of I've seen some people say he's like Kelly Oubre and stuff like that. I don't know if he's like Kelly Oubre, but he likes to play out of the mid range. So he reminds me of a more traditional shooting guard, not one that takes a bunch of threes, but one that likes to go to the rim, ones that like to pull up and do mid range. So he reminds me of a more like a DeMar DeRozan type, but not like DeRozan's like a little bit more heavier. He's like a little bit more built, and Porter's not as heavy, right? So he's a little more nimble. So he's got like a frame like Kelly Oubre, but he plays like DeMar DeRozan. Does that make sense? His shot selection is more like DeMar's, and so that's what I like about him. But obviously, I think first and foremost, like his whatever personal issues that he's been going through and stuff like that, that's going on in his life outside of basketball, That is something I think he needs to kind of settle. And so I wouldn't want the Lakers to invest anything serious asset wise as it relates to him, only because of that reason. Because we don't know just kind of how he is. The other thing is that we don't have a lot of minutes. Like
Yeah,
we're
that's what I was
playing
thinking. Like,
11,
where
12
does he
guys.
fit
Like
in?
we're right. So if he's a guy that, like, maybe the Lakers add, he's at the back of the bench, maybe he gets Quinn Cook's minutes at the end of the game. He's okay with that. He wants to be with a more stable organization. And like if we can bring him along the same way we were able to
Hmm.
bring along THT, that would be great. But it all depends on the player. Uh, it's very, very hard um, to ask a young guy to be patient, especially if he can be productive. And there's not too many folks that would do that. And yes, I know that the Lakers have a very ironclad culture and all that sort of stuff, and we have the best leader in the game. But that doesn't mean every single player wants to co-sign to that. Some players want to get on the court and play serious minutes and stuff like that, and they want to compete. So it's we don't really have the minutes for him. That's really my main issue. Like we just don't have the minutes for him. Now I don't know what's going to happen with the situation. I think he's talented enough where somebody's going to pick him up
I agree.
if he does get released from the Cavs. But if it doesn't work out long term for whatever team he ends up going with, it could be somebody that the Lakers could take a look at. In the offseason. He is a talented guy. I will say that. But the Lakers, the chemistry is important for the Lakers, and I think locker room culture and stuff like that is important to the Lakers too as well. So that's probably more important than any talent that he has as a player.
Yeah, I wouldn't trade anybody we have, and I think for guys like him. So Mimi said he did drop because of behavioral issues in the draft, and I think if you've got behavioral issues and then you go to an organization like Cleveland, which is always in flux, I think that's not the best place for a guy that maybe needs a little more guidance. So, but I think if you were to bring him into LA, bring him to the Lakers, I would imagine he'd fall in line, especially being a clutch. I just can't imagine he would get out of line if he's with the Lakers. But that said, I wouldn't trade anything for him. If they can get him, off the waiver wire, well then you take a flyer on the guy, you see what he's got, you see if he's willing to kind of buy in, and for him, one, maybe you get a ring out of it. Two, you keep your mouth shut, and if you
Yeah.
prove that you've kind of turned things around, maybe that helps you get picked up by another team later on or a larger contract or something. But he is talented, and I think his skill set. I think that there's value in his skill set, especially in the playoffs. Guys that can operate out of the mid range and can get to the rim, I think are extremely valuable in the playoffs. And I think that what Golden State did, I know that they were special, and I think that they made everybody kind of look to either shooting threes or getting to the rim. And the Rockets did that as well. But a guy that can like a DeRozan, so a guy that can get to the
Yeah.
mid range. I mean, we saw that in our playoff run with what Anthony Davis did. That's one of the reasons the
Yeah.
Clippers are successful because Kawhi and Paul George can operate in the mid range, especially Kawhi. I mean, that's one of the reasons Giannis is not as successful in the playoffs, right? He doesn't have a mid range game, but Butler does. Jimmy Butler in the Heat does. So if you can get
Yeah.
him
So
for free, then grab him.
yeah, yeah. So it looks like he isn't rep by Clutch.
Uh,
I really yeah. I guess Mimi, you may be right. I know Garland was under the Clutch umbrella. I thought Kevin Porter Jr. was part of Clutch at one point, but I guess not. I must be wrong. So okay, so he's not Clutch. So that's a moot point now, really,
yep,
as it is. It looks like he's with Rock Nation. That's who it was.
that's interesting.
And yeah, so I'm curious to see what happens with him. I think he's a talented guy, and I know some Laker fans where I saw on the timeline. I tweeted myself. He's a very talented kid. I'm just very curious to see just kind of what that team does. Cleveland has surprised a lot of teams with their defense and their play and all that sort of stuff. So I understand that they want to be very careful about all this sort of stuff. But we'll see. The Lakers are in a good place. Adding a guy like him would just be like a luxury talent sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. What's it called? Like out of necessity and stuff like that. And so yeah, I'm sure guys like this will be available if the Lakers are still playing very well, even when buyout season happens.
Yeah,
And if the Lakers are playing very well and they look really good, we're not going to go after some of these guys. Like it's just we don't have the minutes, and we have to remember that many of these guys that turn into buyout guys in midseason, they need minutes. they want to play somewhere. The reason why they're taking those buyouts is because they want to be part of a rotation for them to be successful and all that sort of stuff. So, like, I think last season a lot of folks were very upset when the Lakers like didn't go after certain guys during the buyout, or we got like Marvin Williams went to the Bucks, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, this guy would have been perfect to play the stretch four, backup four for the Lakers," and he went to the Bucks, another loss, and he may have been, Jeff Green ended up going I think to the Jazz or something like that. I forgot who he went to, and people were like, "Oh God, that's," oh no, he went to the Rockets. People were like, "Oh, another guy that we lost," like Rob doesn't know what he's doing. But he always had Markieff in his back pocket, and so he was, the Lakers are just waiting it out and stuff, that sort of stuff. So, I trust Rob to evaluate things on a very interesting, like a very serious basis. But we really don't have a need for it. We could use an athletic center in case our guys get in foul trouble or something like that, or we could use another wing, another wing defender, be when the time comes. So. I think the Lakers we'll see what this team looks like and what the deficiencies are with this team, as the second half of the season kind of rolls around.
So, the Lakers, they were off the last few days. They've got Golden State tonight. But then kind of like what was happening earlier in the season, they're going to play like every other night, man, going forward. I'm looking at their schedule. They've got, obviously, the Warriors tonight. But then on the 21st, the Bucks, which is the big game. Then they've got the Bulls on the 23rd. Cavs on the 25th, 76ers on the 27th, Pistons on the 28th, Celtics on the 30th, Hawks on the 1st.
My goodness.
And then they get a 3-day break, and they play the Nuggets on the 4th. So, I mean, they're going to play a ton of games in a short stretch. Do you think, like, looking beyond this game, do you think that they focus a lot on the Bucks because that's their next game and that'll be a highly televised, scrutinized game? Or do you think they take this game seriously tonight?
It depends. Do they want to send a message? And I think that's really what decides what it is. Like, I think they want to send a message to like Warrior fans. Obviously,
right.
LeBron always pokes fun at the Warrior fan base and stuff like that, and says funny stuff. Basically every time he refers to, like their comeback with the Cavs against him, and he says like that's one of, and he very well maybe, but like he always says that's like a crown jewel,
right,
series victory for his GOAT case and stuff like that. Like I know a lot of Warrior fans, the Warrior fans that I do follow, like they get very upset when he says anything about it. So he may mess around, he may send a message, who knows. The Bucks game, I think they'll get up for, man. Like I don't know if they'll come out like immediately aggressive, but I think it is a road game. They are very serious on the road. There are no distractions for the team. The Bucks, they did add Drew Holiday. He is a good player. He doesn't exactly lock up LeBron, but he does kind of, he is another body that they can throw at LeBron and stuff like that. I could see them winning against the Bucks, like in dominating fashion, and then like dropping the game to like the Bulls or something like that,
right?
Or dropping a game to the Cavs. It just depends on like kind of what the vibe of that team or what the vibe of the team is. So there is a game where we've got it's a back-to-back on this road trip where it's 76ers on January 27th, and then
Pistons.
The Pistons the very next game. I could see a situation where we like beat the Sixers but then lose to the Pistons. I've been practically trying to speak it into existence that the Lakers are going to lose one of these back-to-back. It's just every time we see it back-to-back, it seems like that second game is always much tighter, whatever the matchup is, because the Lakers are just kind of tired and gassed and stuff like that. But who knows, man? Like they've been undefeated on the road. They've been really good. And they are big games in terms of like, if we look at the national TV schedule, tonight the Bucks game is on TNT. Then the next two games, Bulls in the division. The Sixers game is on ESPN. The Celtics game on ABC. So they're nationally televised games on the road for the Lakers. They'll all stand up. Usually guys like LeBron and AD, they're not trying to punt away games on national television because they know what the discourse will be about the team the next day.
I mean, look, the Bucks, the Celtics, the 76ers, they lose those games or drop, 2 or 3 of those games, the national discourse is going to get really loud. Or Lakers have had a soft schedule. They're not really tested. They can't beat X,
Right.
Y, Z. So, if those teams specifically, those three teams, the Celtics, Lakers, and Celtics, Bucks, and 76ers, and with the Celtics, I think Jason Tatum is out because of COVID tracing and all that stuff. So I assume
Hmm.
he would be back by then. But assuming all three of these teams are healthy, the Lakers I think take two of those three major matchups, and then the rest of those games, I, they probably win 90% of them, man. Like they've been just beating these teams that they're supposed to be, just beating them badly. And there's no reason to believe they won't keep doing it. And it's a road trip as well, and they've just been performing really well. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just crush some of these teams. Even one of the good teams like the Bucks or 76ers, I wouldn't be surprised if they beat one of those teams by double digits.
I wouldn't be surprised. If our theory of the rest of the league being 1 year behind the Lakers is true, some of these teams are going. There's going to be a game on the road where the Lakers just can't miss from three
Right.
because and teams are just leaving them wide open. I don't think teams are prepared for the personnel that this team has. Um, LeBron's playing off ball a lot this season. It feels like more than I've seen at least in the past 3 seasons. I'm sure any of the Bron folks that are in the chat will let us know exactly how much compared to some other times that he's played off ball. But I feel as though him playing off ball not only is a form of load management for him, mentally and physically, but I think it's also very difficult for teams to game plan
Yep.
against when he's an active cutter. Um, and it's not just cutting in transition; he's doing it in half court stuff too. And I think it's actually making things very difficult for teams to have to adjust to, because there may be some games where he just brings the ball full court, posts a guy up, gets a layup, and then goes back.
Mm-hmm.
And then there will be some times where he doesn't touch the ball until like the Lakers run all their misdirection or run all their options, and then they eventually go to him. And by then it's just like, oh shit, we're already all guarding the wrong guy because of all the action off ball stuff that they're running before. And now we've got the wrong guy on LeBron, and now LeBron's about to try to drive on this guy and all that sort of stuff. So I I feel like the Lakers have been doing different stuff with him, and it's a test. It's a testament to how good the offensive guys have been. Schroeder and Marcus Gasol, KCP's growth and stuff like that. All these different guys, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm very interested to see just kind of how this sort of works out in the long term, because LeBron off ball is a devastating force to reckon with when he's attacking the rim. So I hope that we can continue like seeing it more, and like just kind of see what sort of things he
Yeah.
can do in those kind of modes, because he's still facilitating like at a really great pace, finding open guys and stuff like that too as well.
Well, it's certainly disrupting teams' game plans. I mean, LeBron has been he's been a really ball dominant guy his entire career, and he's had the ball in his hands a lot. But this year, I mean, I think you're right. They brought in guys like Dennis Schroeder and Marc Gasol to take away some of that from LeBron, and Anthony Davis handles the ball as well. But I also think like Caruso coming into his own, THT being a complete surprise. I think this season, he started to
Mm-hmm.
come into his own. There's just other guys that can handle the ball, and then even Trez. I mean, he does a lot of ISO, and he's dribbling between his legs, and he's doing his thing. It's just other guys that have the ball in their hands. And so I don't. I think you're right. I think teams are a year behind. I don't think teams are prepared for this team. I think next year, by the time they catch up, then the Lakers will have moved on to whatever the next iteration of the team is going to
Yeah,
be.
whatever. Yeah.
But
Yep.
I think this year is really showing it. The fact that over 90% of the Lakers 3-point shots are uncontested, like teams really still think this
Yeah.
team can't shoot. And I mean we're
Yeah.
14 games into the season. You think you put a hand up and start closing out on some of these shooters.
Yeah, it's and it's going to be a trend that continues until teams finally decide to try to take it away, and then I think that's when you'll see sort of like the best version of this team, which will be one that continually puts pressure on the rim. But I will say the other thing also is that this team is very high IQ, which is
Sure.
something that was a little bit different from last season. Last season we had very specific guys that were making all the different decisions for the team, and I feel like this season the entire team in general, the IQ of this team has gone up significantly. Do we get some boneheaded plays from individual players? For sure, but
Yep.
that's what normally happens through the course of a season. So I'm very curious to see just kind of how that IQ plays, because the assumption is, or what we do know is that the Lakers have not had time to do practice. They have not done formal practices. Everything they've been doing has been in film session, and so I can only imagine what will happen once there is actual spaced out time for them to do like a practice day with each
Hmm.
other and get used to each other's tendencies, and how all that stuff kind of gets married together.
I mean, look, you look at the other teams that were you had late playoff runs, and so the Heat and Nuggets have struggled this year. They haven't looked like
Mm-hmm.
themselves, and the Lakers on the flip
Mm-hmm.
have looked more dominant this year than they did to start last season. And so,
That's the crazy part. Yep.
I mean, credit this team. You know, the high IQ guys, veterans, knowing what's at stake. If you're going to be playing, it's no reason to be messing around, right? Like if you're going to be playing in a COVID environment, go out there and handle your business, and that's what they're doing. So that's all I got, man, for the pregame. Anything you want to add?
No, I'm just gonna enjoy the game tonight. I'm gonna catch this Nets Bucks game, and all of the extreme reactions that people are gonna have after all of this, and just look forward to this game. Hopefully, it's another Lakers win, and we get to enjoy our league leading 12th victory if we get it. And after that, it's a long road trip, man. We're gonna be
Yep.
7 games on the road for like the next 2 weeks. That is a lot of road games. So hopefully the Lakers finish off their mini homestand with a nice big win, and then we get right back to work on the road.
Now I'm with you, guys. Thank
Oh, and,
everybody.
and sorry, as always, thank you in the chat. I hope
Hmm.
everybody's doing well. I hope everybody's remaining safe and healthy. And I'll see everybody on the timeline.
Yep, I echo that, man. Thank everybody for joining us. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our pre and post game content. We may or may not do a post game. As you guys know, that falls on me. So we'll see how I'm feeling later on tonight. But thank you guys as always. And we'll catch you guys later on the timeline. Thanks for watching Lakers Central.